Climate Change presents Making Action Plan for the Better. Given role is making an action plan for the barangay officials, convincing that the community needs to be more environmentally friendly. Starting off with the problem of flooding.
A good day to everyone. I am Patricia Maria A. Fernandez, PBS and English 1 student from USO. And today we're about to tackle what is climate change. Climate change is a change in the usual weather pattern of a place. This could be a change in how much rain usually gets in a year, or it could be a change in place usual temperature or even a season. So climate change is also a change in Earth's climate. This could be the change in Earth's usual temperature, or it could be the change in where rain and snow usually fall on Earth. But in our country, we just usually experience the season. So in our barangay locally, we're experiencing much trouble in our month's season. That season is the rainy season. So we are experiencing a lot of problems, especially flood. So what is flood? A flood is an overflow of water that submerges land that is usually dry. In the sense of flowing water, the word may also be applied in flow of the tide. Floods are an area of study of the discipline hydrology and are of the significant concern of agriculture, civil engineering, and the public health. So what are the flood effects? First off, loss of lives. The gravest effect of flooding is death. In fact, flooding is the number of severe weather killer. Floods have claimed thousands of lives throughout history. And flood kills carrying people away in fast-moving water or drowning them. Secondly, property damage. Flooding can also cause property damage to buildings by blowing out windows, sweeping away doors, corridoring walls and foundation, and sending debris into infrastructure at the same pace. Not to mention the furniture and items inside a home or business that damage when floods water make it inside. Lastly, the economical impacts. By the word economic impact of flooding, it can be devastating to a community. This comes to a damage and disruption to things like communication towers, apartments, roads, and bridges. This brings business activities in an area to a standstill. Oftentimes, major flooding results in dislocation and dysfunction of normal life long after floodwater recedes. Long after floodwater recedes. So, flood is a natural catastrophe which man cannot stop. So, as an action, we have acknowledged before a flood, during a flood, and after a flood. So, before a flood, building an emergency kit and make a family communication plan is a must. Consider installing check valves to prevent flood from backing up to the drains at your home, and if feasible, construct barriers to stop flood water from entering the building, and seal walls and basements with waterproofing compounds. During a flood, listen to the radio or a television for information. Be aware of streams, drainage channels, canyons, and other areas known to flood suddenly. Flash floods can occur in these areas with or without typical warnings such as rain clouds. And after a flood, avoid moving water. Be aware of areas where floodwaters have receded. Roads may have weakened and could collapse under the weight of a car. And staying on firm ground, moving water only 6 inches deep can sweep you off your feet. Standing water can be electrically charged from underground or ground power plant. After taking up some informations before, during, and after a flood, we take to plan an action for it. So, for a flood emergency plan, number 1 is the assessment of flood areas. Assessment of flood areas mean like areas likely to flood, extent to reach of the flood, and potential depth of flooding. Number 2 is the estimation of infrastructure. So, in that critical infrastructure at risk, natural resources under jeopardy, and utilities or key assessment compromise. So, in due to what you're creating especially on the emergency plan in a flood. So number one is the assessment of flood areas. Assessment of flood areas meaning the areas likely to flood, extent or reach of the flood, and the potential depth of flooding. Number two is the estimation of frequency. Frequency of occurrence, review of historic frequency, and the predicted or probable timeline. Number three is the location of infrastructure, critical infrastructure at risk, natural sources under jeopardy, and utilities or key assets compromised. Frequency of occurrence, review of historic frequency, and the predicted or probable timeline. Number three is the location of infrastructure, critical infrastructure at risk. The fourth is the contact of response team, which is the list of names and contact information, local flood response personnel, regional and state response personnel. Number five is the preparation of flood defense, assessment of sandbag storage, location of vital equipment, operation of warning mechanism. Lastly, planning for traffic routing, traffic routes, evacuation routes and corridors, and possible detour of the flood waters, increasing the concentration of pollutants from domestic effluents and agrochemicals. Secondly, by preventing backflow to the river area of stagnant water will be created, which may increase the likelihood of diseases such as cholera. Third, embankments may cause some wetlands to dry out, leading to a loss of biodiversity. Fourth, there may be the decrease of dry season, that water flows, and a reduction in groundwater exchange. Fifth is the decreased flooding will decrease capture fishery, which many of the poor people upon as their major source of protein. Aquaculture based upon the compartment is likely to use such reduced diversity of fish, which may have harmful nutritional effects. And lastly, land acquisition. For the construction of the embankments will lead to displacement of people, and since the majority of people are landless and depend on common property resources such as wetlands,